The wind whipped through the open doors of the train station, carrying the clatter of rolling suitcases and the distant wail of a departing whistle. She stood near the edge of platform 7, her small suitcase at her feet, fingers brushing over the cracked leather handle until her knuckles whitened. A red scarf, frayed at the edges, tangled around her neck, tugged by the gusts, as if it were alive, pulling her toward the crowd. Her eyes scanned the mass of moving bodies. Families laughing, arms linked, the familiar warmth of belonging brushing past her like a memory she'd been banned from. She clenched her jaw. She could hear the echoes of their voices in her head, snippets of last year's reunion, of the words she'd never been allowed to speak. Maybe they forgot, she whispered, barely audible to herself. The scarf fluttered again, and she gripped it tighter, twisting it around her fingers. It was hers, and yet it carried a weight she couldn't name, a pulse that reminded her she'd been left out, left behind. She watched a little girl tumble over a suitcase wheel, her mother's hand shooting out in instinctive rescue, and felt an ache in her chest, bitter and hollow. The station smelled of coffee, wet coats, and something metallic in the air, the scent of movement and waiting. She felt her hands shake, not from the cold, but from the quiet fury bubbling beneath her skin. A train arrived, screeching to a halt, and a wave of people surged forward, pulling her eyes toward them. Faces she knew, or thought she did, blurred past, laughing, greeting, belonging. Her gaze fell on a cracked wristwatch lying abandoned on a bench. The glass spiderwebbed across its face, each fracture catching a shard of light. Time broken, yet still ticking. A voice behind her said, "Excuse me, are you waiting for the 7:15? But she didn't answer. She didn't move. Her lips parted, then closed again. Her eyes found the exit ramp, the sunlight slicing through the station like a promise, or maybe a threat. Somewhere out there, they were celebrating. Somewhere out there, she had been erased. She adjusted the scarf around her neck, the wind tangling it once more, and pressed her palms to the handle of her suitcase. It felt heavier now, loaded with more than clothes. With every passing second, her chest tightened, a slow burn that whispered of plans she hadn't dared voice yet. The announcement blared overhead, calling a train that wasn't hers, a life that wasn't hers. Her heartbeat thrummed against her ribs. She took a step forward. And then another. Something was waiting for her out there. Something that would make them remember. But what, and when, remained suspended, like the train wheels before they moved. The train rumbled beneath her feet, a low growl that seemed to echo inside her chest. She hugged the red scarf tighter, the frayed threads biting into her palms. Her eyes drifted over the families bustling around her, the children dragging their parents toward gates, the older couples embracing like nothing could break them. She remembered her father's voice, quiet but firm, years ago, "A family is a promise, even when it hurts. Don't ever forget who you are." She had tried not to forget, but the sting of being excluded had carved itself into the hollow of her chest. The scarf had been hers since childhood, a gift from her mother who had disappeared in fragments long before anyone noticed. It had traveled with her through broken apartments, under cheap fluorescent lights, across late-night shifts at diners and offices where she counted coins she never spent on herself. It smelled faintly of lavender and smoke, and whenever she touched it, she could hear the echo of someone telling her, "You belong somewhere, even if it's not here." Her small suitcase rested at her side, scuffed and patched, carrying not just clothes but the quiet determination she had carried for months. She had moved cities, juggled jobs, and kept her head down, learning the rhythm of survival in the spaces where no one waited for her. Yet, here, in this station, the familiar ache returned, the reminder of all the doors closed to her, the dinners where she wasn't invited, the laughter that stopped when she entered a room. A stranger had taken the bench across from her. He said nothing, only observed, as if cataloging her presence without judgment or intrusion. Her heart skipped at the silent attention, a fleeting warmth mingled with irritation. Why now? Why here? The train doors hissed open again, and she watched a father lift his daughter onto his shoulders. A mother pressed her lips to her husband's cheek. She felt the weight of her own absence press down, heavier than the suitcase beside her. She imagined herself at the next family reunion. What would she do? How would she make them see that she hadn't vanished, that she could create her own space without waiting for permission? A memory rose unbidden, herself at 8, dragging the same suitcase through a rainy street, the straps cutting into her small hands as her father whispered, "Hold on tight. One day, you'll see why it mattered." The words had been vague then, but now they sang in her chest, a steady drumbeat of quiet rebellion. The stranger's gaze caught hers for a fraction of a second. She blinked, and his eyes didn't waver. Her pulse surged, her lips parted, and she hesitated. The announcement of a delayed train crept through the station. The crowd moved in waves, yet she stayed rooted, caught between leaving and staying, between doubt and resolve. A confused, fleeting smile touched her lips as she shifted her weight, wondering if this moment, this pause, was the first step toward reclaiming more than just a seat at the table. And then the suitcase nudged her ankle. She almost didn't move. Almost. Rain began as a soft drizzle, tapping against the glass ceiling of the station in irregular rhythms, each drop a tiny drumbeat on the floorboards. She pulled her scarf tighter, the red fabric dampening against her neck, and felt the chill seep into her bones. The stranger across from her shifted slightly, and she noticed the worn leather of his shoes, cracked and scuffed, the soles uneven as though they had carried him across countless miles. A flash of paper peeked from his wallet, a photograph, edges curled, a child's face smiling up. She blinked, recognizing in him a weight she knew too well, the quiet endurance of carrying more than one's share. Her own hands tightened around her suitcase handle. Every crease, every scuff on it told the story of nights spent alone, scraping together coins to pay rent, washing dishes until her palms were raw. The mirrored reflection of struggle and the stranger's silent composure made her chest ache, a private echo of pain she had never named aloud. Was he a warning or a sign? A stranger or an ally in this unspoken rebellion she carried like a second skin? The drizzle escalated to a steady rain, turning the station into a blur of umbrellas and hurried footsteps. Thunder rolled distantly, as if the sky itself were pressing down with her own indecision. Part of her urged flight, a natural instinct honed over years of rejection, leave, disappear, survive. But another part lingered, drawn to the quiet presence opposite her, the subtle hints of life that mirrored her own. She wanted to speak, to ask, to understand, but words stuck, thick and hesitant. She caught a glimpse of his hands resting on his knees, veins mapping years of work, fingertips slightly trembling. A sudden flash of empathy hit her. Perhaps he had been cast aside once too. Perhaps he knew what it meant to be invisible in a room full of belonging. The air between them thickened with questions that had no answers. Fate? Coincidence? Or something darker, manipulation cloaked in silence? Her eyes wandered to the station clock, the hands crawling with a cruel patience. She felt pulled in two directions, the outside world waiting for her decisions, and the quiet gravity of the man across from her. The suitcase seemed heavier now, loaded with both literal and imagined burdens. Lightning cracked somewhere outside, sharp and jagged, and her heartbeat synced with it, rapid and uncertain. She shifted, nearly rising, then paused. The stranger's gaze flicked toward her briefly, just enough to make her wonder if he had noticed her hesitation, or if he had been waiting for it all along. She swallowed, the taste of rain and uncertainty lingering on her tongue, and found herself caught in the delicate tension between leaving and staying, certainty and ambiguity. The announcement blared overhead, drowned almost entirely by the storm. She exhaled slowly, her body suspended between choices she could not yet name. And in that hesitation, the air seemed to hold its breath with her. She stepped toward the exit, suitcase rolling unevenly beneath her fingers, her pulse hammering like a drumbeat she couldn't control. The rain had turned the platform into a mirror of gray streaks and puddles, reflecting her hesitations back at her. She wanted to leave, to vanish into the crowd and never look back. But something in the stranger's posture held her, anchored her feet like roots digging into the cold concrete. Her red scarf, soaked now and clinging to her neck, trembled in the wind. It had been hers through years of solitude, a talisman against loneliness, and now it seemed almost fragile in her hands. Then, without warning, he lifted it, brushing the wet fabric over his own shoulders as if returning a fragment of her past she had forgotten she'd carried with her. Some people carry more than just bags. His voice was low, almost swallowed by the rain. They carry silence. The word struck her chest, a soft collision of recognition and shame. Her eyes narrowed, taking in the strangers passing by, the murmurs, the sidelong glances that seemed to measure her worth, to tally her failures. A mother nudged her child aside to avoid brushing past her, and a businessman scowled at her as though her presence disrupted some delicate order. Even the station itself seemed to judge her, walls glistening, cold tiles reflecting her trembling hands. She nearly turned, nearly walked away, wanting to escape the scrutiny, the shared weight of unspoken stories, the stranger who now mirrored her own guarded heart. But she stopped, mid-step, glancing back. His eyes met hers, steady, patient, unyielding, not demanding, not pleading. He held her scarf loosely, like a bridge she hadn't realized she needed to cross. The suitcase felt heavier than ever, laden not just with clothing, but with all the nights she had counted coins, all the meals she had skipped, all the times she had been erased. She ran a finger along the worn handle, tracing memories of rain-soaked streets and lonely buses, and realized that the object was no longer just hers. It had become a symbol of endurance, of defiance, of the life she had forged despite being left behind. The stranger shifted slightly, a hint of a smile playing at the corner of his lips, but his expression remained enigmatic. She wanted to ask him everything, to demand clarity, to expose the truth behind his quiet presence, but the words lodged in her throat. Instead, she exhaled, a single shuddering breath, and let her gaze sweep the station one last time. The rain fell harder now, droplets streaming down her face, indistinguishable from tears. She stayed frozen, poised between retreat and confrontation, the air thick with unsaid words, unshared pain, and unclaimed hope. And then the train doors hissed open, but she didn't move. The moment hung, suspended, a delicate fracture of heartbeats and rain, waiting for something neither of them dared to name. The train station had emptied almost entirely now, the rain softened to a drizzle, leaving silver puddles that reflected the pale streetlights. She tugged the red scarf closer, still damp, and lifted her suitcase, feeling its weight heavier than ever, not just from clothes, but from anticipation she couldn't name. He finally spoke, breaking the silence that had been both comforting and torturous. "You know, that bag," he said, nodding toward her suitcase, "it belonged to someone very important to me." Her fingers froze around the handle. "Important? How?" He hesitated, then opened his wallet. The photograph she had glimpsed earlier fell into her hand, a little girl, smiling shyly, holding a suitcase just like hers. Her chest tightened. "That's your daughter?" "Yes," he said softly, eyes tracing the reflection of the puddles on the platform. She passed years ago. That suitcase, it reminds me she's still moving through the world, somehow." The words hit her like a sudden storm. The scarf around her neck, the very object she had held onto through loneliness and rejection, suddenly felt like a bridge across time and memory. She traced the frayed edges again, the fibers soaked, and a remembered phrase surfaced from her father's voice: "A family is a promise, even when it hurts." Only now, it wasn't a warning, it was a lifeline, echoing across the years in a different light. Her mind reeled. And then the twist landed like a cold slap. The stranger wasn't just some watcher in the station. A news headline she had glanced at earlier that morning flickered in her memory. The owner of the company she'd spent months applying to, the one who had ignored her emails and passed over her resume, had been standing here all along. Her pulse surged. Every thought, every struggle, every lonely night she'd endured suddenly converged into this moment. Her suitcase felt impossibly heavy now, laden with more than just belongings, loaded with choice, consequence, and a point of no return. She realized that walking away wasn't an option. She couldn't. The red scarf around her neck seemed to hum with quiet urgency, a tether pulling her forward. She exhaled, shakily, and turned toward the doorway that led to the waiting area, the threshold of a decision that would change everything. Each step echoed her heartbeat, slow and deliberate, a drumbeat of courage she hadn't known she had. The station lights glimmered on the puddles beneath her feet, and she felt the weight of all she had carried, all she had endured, pressing her toward that one act of crossing, an act that would irrevocably alter the shape of her life. And as she pushed open the door, leaving the rain and hesitation behind, she knew there was no turning back. The station was quieter now, the echoes of rain replaced by the faint hum of fluorescent lights. She stood at the edge of the platform once more, the red scarf damp and clinging to her neck, but this time she felt its weight differently, not as a shield, but as a tether linking past and present. The same cracked suitcase rested at her feet, scuffed and familiar, yet now it seemed to pulse with quiet significance, a vessel carrying not just belongings, but stories, memories, and a fragile hope. He stepped closer, eyes fixed on her, calm and unreadable. "I need you to understand something," he said softly. "I didn't choose you for love. I chose you because you remind me of her." Her throat tightened. She had imagined rejection, confrontation, judgment, but this acknowledgement was a different kind of shock, a raw mirror of the life she had carried, the life she thought she had endured alone. She traced the edges of the scarf, feeling the frayed threads press into her fingers, and understood that it had always been part of a bridge, between what she had lost, what she had endured, and what she could still give. He lifted the scarf from her neck, holding it delicately, almost reverently, and draped it around his own shoulders. "She would have wanted this," he murmured. The suitcase remained at her side, but she let it stay there, a silent acknowledgement of everything she had carried without surrendering it. Her chest burned with a mixture of grief and release. She had crossed thresholds before, but this time the crossing was different. It was a surrender of expectation, not of self. The wind tugged at her hair, the station lights flickered, and she realized she was giving something away, her desire to be chosen, her insistence on belonging, not to escape her solitude, but to honor the memory of those who had shaped her. In that moment, the station transformed. The platform where she had once felt invisible now reflected her presence with clarity. Families passed, unseeing, unaware, yet she no longer felt erased. The suitcase, the scarf, the quiet stranger, all converged into a single, unspoken truth, that some connections are meant to change you, not stay with you. He nodded once, silently acknowledging her understanding, then turned, carrying the scarf and the fragments of memory she had entrusted to him. She watched him walk away, each step deliberate, until he disappeared into the shadows of the station. The suitcase remained, untouched, a quiet monument to endurance and choice. She exhaled, a long, trembling breath, feeling her own heart expand into the space left behind. The red scarf no longer clung, it had moved on, carrying the weight of remembrance and release. She lifted the suitcase, felt the sturdiness of her own resolve, and stepped toward the exit, her footsteps echoing in rhythm with the life she had chosen, not for recognition, not for acceptance, but for herself. The platform fell silent, except for her heartbeat, slow and steady. And in that silence, she thought, not every stranger you help is meant to stay, but some leave you changed forever. The morning sun filtered softly through the thin curtains of her small apartment, scattering gold across the hardwood floor. She moved quietly, dragging her suitcase to the corner, brushing the edges against the wall. The red scarf rested folded in a drawer now, its frayed threads catching the light, no longer a talisman of burden but a memory, a whisper of all she had endured and all she had learned. She sipped coffee from a chipped mug, the steam curling into the air like a small, intimate ritual of beginnings. Outside, the city stirred in subdued chaos, tires on wet streets, the occasional murmur of neighbors, pigeons pecking at breadcrumbs near the curb. She felt it all, the calm, the stirrings, the quiet pulse of life moving on around her, and realized she was moving differently within it, too. Straighter shoulders. Lighter steps. A breath held less tightly. A line from her father came unbidden, and she smiled faintly, the memory warm. Sometimes love is not romance, it's recognition. Recognition of struggle, of courage, of the fragments of people left behind yet never forgotten. The scarf, now tucked away, carried that recognition in its worn fibers, a subtle testament to the bridges she had crossed and the doors she had chosen to leave open, even for herself. Her gaze drifted to the window. Children ran in puddles from last night's rain, laughing without care. She thought of the stranger, of the brief but profound intersection of their lives, and felt a quiet gratitude. He had shown her that not all connections are meant to linger, but that even fleeting bonds can reshape the contours of who we are. She rose, stepping onto the balcony, letting the morning wind lift her hair and tug gently at the scarf draped over the drawer inside. Her suitcase rested in the corner, its weight finally unburdened. She imagined herself walking to the train station again, not to chase, not to return, but as a witness to the life she had carved, independent yet threaded with memories she honored silently. The city hummed below, each sound a reminder that she was neither small nor invisible. She exhaled, slow and measured, and for a moment, simply let herself exist in that space of quiet, unclaimed power. Her thoughts lingered, open and unfinalized, and she whispered to the empty room, almost to herself, "Not every journey demands an answer, some only ask that you walk it fully." And with that, she turned back inside, leaving light on the scarf, shadows soft on the floor, and the lingering weight of memory to settle gently, unresolved but whole.